Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Iron Canon Podcast, your home on the Star Wars Underworld Podcast Network for in-depth discussion on the lore, the High Republic, and the whole canon of the galaxy far, far away. My name is Matthew, and that's Joel joining me from across the continent. Joel, how are you doing this week?
I'm good, and I'm just going to take this moment to let everyone know that there is a writer strike. So if you see some writers, join them on the picket line, help them out. You support those writers. They
Support
make
the
our stuff
writers.
that we like.
That's true. That is very true. This week we're talking about expanded universe. Now that isn't the name I've heard in a long time. At least I'm not name I've used in a long time. But is there room for the concept in current Disney canon ecosystem? How might it help us understand the relationship of the films to expanded materials and of the films themselves? Before we do that, let's get to the plugs. Here you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Ion Cannon Pod. Twitter, you got a lot of conversations going. Instagram, I mostly share sometimes stories, how the kids do, how the kids use Instagram these days. We're trying to get up with it. But then also, yeah, we got YouTube memberships here on the Star Wars Underworld YouTube channel, super chats here on the Star Wars Underworld YouTube channel. Joel, you want to talk about Discord? Jump in there.
Yes, I'll just use this opportunity to say hello, orange juice dude. I love orange juice, so gotta say someone who said
That's
loves
fair.
orange juice.
Orange juice is good.
Yes, we have the Star Wars Underworld Discord. There will be no game night this week. That will be next week. I plan to switch it up a little bit, but I'm going to leave that as a surprise.
Nice.
But if you follow the Star Wars Underworld trend, you might be able to guess what we play next. But you can always join us. We have lots of fun, conversations, and all that good stuff. So yes, join in the description below.
There we go. How's Friday? How was Friday night?
Oh, Friday was great. We played Fortnite. We had like two teams of 3 going on at the same time simultaneously. Went on for several hours. So yeah, it was lots of fun.
Sweet. That's exciting. I was out, but yeah, I should join sometime when I'm free. I'm free, and when you're free, whenever you are, if you're watching, join us. All right, let's dive into this week in Star Wars. Joel, you there's no eyes. Well, there's a bit of eyes on screen. We'll get to that in a bit. But you had a thought about Ahsoka and how she's alive.
Yeah. So I've been thinking about I'm as a storyteller myself and just someone who think about it. I am someone who believes that plot and story are two very different things. Plot is just like we must get the Death Star plans to Yavin and then blow up the Death Star. That's the plot. But the story is about a kid who grows up, learns some responsibility, and then learns about the wider universe. Or Han Solo's arc, his story is about a guy who only cares about money and then realizes he likes friends, so he then gives up money for friendship. So I've been thinking about, we talk about this plot of Ahsoka is, the search for Ezra and Thrawn's coming back. But what's the story? What's Ahsoka's arc at the start of the series, and what's her kind of trajectory at the end? Like like Kenobi series, where it's like he was depressed at first, and then at the end he's a little less depressed, and you get to see Qui-Gon. So he's feeling good. So what's Ahsoka doing? And like I've been thinking about it, and like I think it'd be interesting if the Ahsoka series is almost a meta commentary of why Ahsoka is even alive. Why is she here? Because it's sort of like, well, she there was a good place to take her off the chessboard, and that was when she dealt with Vader, that last the sacrifice that she couldn't get to her master. But then obviously World Between Worlds, and then she got yoinked back to life. So it's like I think it'd be interesting if the show, at least on her arc, is all about why is she even here? What is my purpose now in a post Endor world? Why do I get to live it post the original trilogy?
Yeah.
In some sense, I have to think about her, and then like what are the other characters, like Sabine and Hera probably are like, well, we're no longer rebels, we're part of the government. Obviously Sabine looks sad, so like, well, my buddy Ezra's not back, so what was it all for? And I have a feeling Hera's probably dealing with the responsibility of being a high member of a government instead of now captain of the rebellion.
Yeah.
So I'm sure those are going to be arcs too. So but that's kind of my primary thought of like, what's Ahsoka's arc? Where is she going to start? And where's she kind of going to be at the beginning? Like is she going to be kind of grumpy, and then she kind of regains herself? What's going on in that head of hers? So it's something I've been thinking about, kind of what the story of Ahsoka is, and less obviously what the plot is, because we know what the plot is. It's Thrawn's coming back, and we got to find Ezra. Okay.
Yeah, that's a great point, great distinction between plot and character, and how we focus on plot, we focus on lore. This happens then, kind of what I was saying maybe a few weeks ago, talking about, I think, was it about Celebration, or I think we were talking about all the trailer, and so the story of Ahsoka, in more than we've seen, is the story of the Jedi, and you can also talk about story in that larger communal sense of this people, this ancient sect of force wizards or space wizards that were wiped out in Order 66. It's interesting you mentioned Ahsoka after Endor. I'm more curious to how she understands. I mean, we brought this up. Ahsoka lives. Ahsoka after Malachor. How does she understand that? Because people who get a second chance at life, what do you do with it? Someone like Ahsoka is gonna make good on that. You'd think, but we'll see what that means for her, and that's another question: is what I mean for her to live well and make good on life. What the Force is calling her to do, and the relationship between the Jedi and I know there's news about Rey and her story and everything happening with Luke, both starting off being all heroic in this time period, and then going to what we see him on Ahch-To. What's Ahsoka's role in that? Because we see where we leave her off, she doesn't want to train Grogu because she's afraid of what's happening to Anakin. So parallel to how Luke doesn't want to train Rey. Same reason, right? So I'm curious to see where she ends. Just thinking now, how might that relate to the Rey film? After, obviously, you have everything with Luke and the whole sequel trilogy to go through, but what's the story of the Jedi and the personal story of Ahsoka in that? It's an excellent question. I appreciate that. I don't know if you have anything more to respond there. Or...
I mean, there is that one line where Hugh Yang is like, perhaps we should begin again, and it's like, well, maybe that is Ahsoka kind of having her Luke moment of like, well, maybe the Jedi should probably start stepping in and, kind of start being active, and it's sort of like, and I do wonder, it's like, I do think the show will primarily be focused in that Mando time frame of the New Republic era. I mean, it is sort of, but it's like, well, you're right. You do have like 4 years of Ahsoka should be alive by the time of the original trilogy. Like, was she stuck on Malachor for those 4 years the whole time? Like,
was it 4 years or just 2 years? I don't know what the
Rebels ended.
So this is at the end of season 2, right?
No, that was season 4 when she came back.
Yeah.
So she yeeted out of Malachor, and then she went back into Malachor.
Yeah.
And Vader were already gone. So that is at very least 2 years before Yavin, which is A New Hope. So she was around the whole time. So So what was she doing during that time period? What was she doing? And I don't think the whole show could have necessarily focused on that unless they want to do the flashback thing, which is possible. But there's definitely the forward momentum story as well. I don't want to make this too long, but I'll just say you talk about how we focus a lot on plot and lore, and I think that's where a lot of the filler discussions come in when it comes to like filler episodes and whatnot. And don't get me wrong, I do think you can plot things maybe tighter. Like again, I think maybe Bad Batch could have put Dr. Hemlock a little bit earlier, maybe plotted it, but sort of like plot and story. What is the story of season 2 of the Bad Batch? It's about a bunch of people just trying to survive in the galaxy, and then when they realize they can't hide forever, then the Empire comes, and so like, oh shoot, our whole family's been just broken. We got to do something now. Time to change course.
Yeah,
that's the story of season 2. So that's kind of my little tangent there. But I mean, I'm just again curious what's the story of Ahsoka, like what, and that's kind of that's what I felt was a little lacking in Mando season 3 for myself. So I hope that's something Ahsoka does a little better in terms of not just be, oh look, Thrawn's back. Thrawn, look for Thrawn. That's the whole thing. So,
I mean, it's why filler is a swear word. We should bleep it out on this channel. It's just not allowed to be used as an accusation. I mean, you could if you want, but because so much character happens in episodes that are critiqued as filler, like the racing episode with Tech. Right.
Oh, that's a good one.
That's a great example. Here's an example of what you mentioned. The time between when she comes back into Malachor until Endor. That there's some plot to be revealed there, maybe some hints of it. But the more important question is, what does that mean for her? And that's maybe what you're getting at. Why? What did we post Endor? What does it mean? Who is she between Malachor and Endor? And as what does that mean to her self-understanding? She's just encountered how her master has turned to the dark side. She just figured that out, and now she has to spend all this time in isolation, 2 years in isolation.
I think it's more than 2 years. I think it's probably
okay. So just to try to figure this out. So she gets sent back because Ezra. I don't know. I guess it's both. It's
a little time travel-y, but it's not too much time. Well, it's not. Yeah, it's kind of time travel-y, but World Between Worlds is sort of like there's no time and space, so it's in between. So Ezra's from it's a little bit where like Ezra is from a year in the future. Ahsoka is still like a year in the past. But Ahsoka then returned back to her time, so it's not like she traveled back to the future. She just traveled back to where she came from. She's got pulled out of the dimension almost.
I guess I always thought she had this sense of herself that she should stay out of things from the time she gets sent back to the time Ezra pulls her out. Then when we get to the time Ezra pulls her out, then she can reappear in the galaxy.
That's true, but the thing is, the time Ezra pulls her out, that is still 4 to 5 years before Endor.
Yeah, so that's what I mean. So from that 4 to 5 years before Endor till Endor, I think it's fair game to.
So yeah,
figure
who knows what she was doing?
Unless she does something, becomes a hermit, takes the Barash vow just for the sake of it. That'll be great. There's my hot take. Ahsoka name drops the Barash vow. Somebody name drops the Barash vow on screen. I want to hear that.
But it seems like she's doing violence by the time you get to her episode of Mando.
Oh, sure. So. Well, yeah, she's revoked the Barash vow by then. She's taken up the Porter vow. There we go. Okay. My this week, the Supreme Leader of Canada, and this is obviously a bit of a joke, but as some of you may or may not know, there was a coronation in Westminster Abbey this week, and I actually haven't watched it. There's a lot of stuff I haven't watched yet. We'll get to that. But people were making a parallel, making a thing. And I'll bring this up. I'll take that away. I'll bring this up here. People are like, there's this little parallel here. This gold cloak thing happening there. So I'm gonna nerd out there because you all made this parallel, this very sacred thing. I'm gonna waste your time by telling you what this thing actually is. It's actually called a super tunica because it goes over the tunic. And it is a sign. It is a bit of a Star Wars parallel still. It's a sign of divine anointing as a chosen one. So hence it's right after the anointing, and it goes behind the screen. I'm convinced now that I don't know this is the culture site, Twitch or Twitter account. Joel, I don't know if you know who posted this or found this, but
I probably did somewhere. I post a lot of the memes too.
Yeah. So good job, but good job finding it. But now that I see it, I'm convinced that the production designers, the costume designers on The Last Jedi Raw, or even Force Awakens to some extent, but especially The Last Jedi Raw, here's a parallel. I mean, 1953. It was just 1953 was Elizabeth's coronation. Here's Charles' coronation. There we go. So I'm just nerding out. I don't know, Joel, if you've seen any of the coronation yet, but
no, I heard it a lot. Yeah. And yes, Orange Juice Dude, I love the crown too. So
is it shown on the crown? That'd be a good question.
Elizabeth wears it in the crown. I think she wears something else.
Yeah, well, that's right, because she wears the dress. Yeah. Anyway, I mean, I like that because it's a medieval garment, a medieval vestment. The first king of England is I think St. Edward. From around the year 1000. I'm kind of fudgy. I've looked it up, but I forgot. And over time, these traditions develop. Yeah, signs of divine right. So maybe Snoke is trying to claim something. He's trying to be in charge of the Sith Eternal. I don't know. I'm just reading stuff into it. I'm just making stuff up right now.
Prince William slices Charles, and then Henry and him fight the Praetorian Guard.
Yeah, there we go. Praetorian Guard. No, that's another thing for me. That's ancient Rome, but Anyway, moving right along there. So we got some eyes on screen again. I've had a super busy weekend. I've since May the 4th. I've just been wall to wall, so I haven't had time to sit down and watch any of Visions Volume 2 or Young Jedi Adventures. So, Joel, let's hear what you've been able to see of Visions Volume 2. Give your non-spoiler thoughts.
I've seen almost every one except the final one. I don't know why I'm waiting on that one. I can have to do it anytime. All super lovely and beautiful stories. Just, this is sort of, it's funny that we call it Ion Canon, but this is actually, I think, Vision is sort of the kind of the thing of like the beauty of the opposite extreme of like when nothing is canon, where you just strip Star Wars of like all the lore, the continuity, the grand storylines that've been going on for 50 years, and just like, here's a story set in the universe, and that matters are like the themes and the values that Star Wars had brought, and told with some beautiful animation styles. It's just quite an amazing feat. I love Visions. I'll just say I heard a rumor. Say, I got a broken heart. I got a rumor that Visions Volume 3 is probably in production as well. I would not be shocked. I think they like Visions. I think Visions is something they probably won't hopefully continue for a while. And I hope it's just one of those special little things that keeps on trucking, because it's just kind of cool when you strip down Star Wars and look at its parts. It just, you get some pretty amazing things. So yeah, Visions Volume 2, epic. Very epic.
That's what Visions is for. It's to just express and explore. Even wasn't that comic book concept that I do have, I think that was called Visions 2 as well. And so I think, the one with where we first see Spider Mall. Yeah. I think it was called Visions.
Yeah. That's a little different because that was like concept art for like the actual films and stories.
Okay, fair enough. But yeah.
It's certainly interesting for sure.
But my point being, it's don't worry about the story necessarily, or don't worry about the lore and the plot, the canon. Just explore and values and having and using it as a way of actually helping us then look back on the canon and understand more deeply what it's about. And so I'm definitely looking forward to that. I think I expect with Volume 1, I was all a little disoriented, I guess is the word, because I'm trying to locate and fix this design into this time period and all that history. So it's kind of ahistorical or anti-historical in that way, but looking forward to that. I from what I have heard and what Dom was telling me on the weekend was that it ties more into real life human history in its influences, and so as Visions Volume 1 did with the samurai and with just a lot of Japanese legends.
No story spoilers or plot spoilers, but I'll just say there's one in particular that's like, actually there's like two in particular, like very dealing with the ideas of like colonialism, the destruction of the natural world, and just like the nastiness of all that. So Dominic definitely got on point there.
Yeah. So looking forward to it when I have time to watch it. I'm behind on Ted Lasso. I'm behind on other things. Another thing I'm behind on is Young Jedi Adventures. Only seen the one episode of that, but all I'm gonna say there is High Republic on screen, and I saw the first episode of it, and I was so excited. You knew it's not for me. It's for a younger audience, but it was still fun to watch that first episode. You knew
the 2 episodes.
you knew the moral was going to be teamwork, and not. It was a nice story, but not being too attached to items and objects, and preferring people over objects. Oddly enough, the thing that Yoda encourages this Padawan to lose his lightsaber, it saves another kid's life. Which, okay, like, so much for this weapon is your life. I guess by the time of the I will actually come to think of it. Now I'm talking about this. It's another sign of the before and after of the High Republic, right? Before, they are willing to value life over objects. After, you have masters berating their Padawans for losing their lightsaber. I'm gather they
I mean,
still
to be
would.
fair, is Obi-Wan the only person who berates Anakin for it?
Jaro Tapal, when during Order 66, when Cal loses his lightsaber, it's like Padawan, your lightsaber.
Okay, that's fair. Although
Yeah.
I do wonder in some cases with Anakin, that's like I feel like that's more of a lesson of trying to take care of your things better. Just don't go all,
Yeah.
don't treat your lightsaber like it's a spinny thing. Like
Yeah.
a
Like a
like
nice
yeah, this
trinket.
valuable object. Don't like just spin it around and like just play with it. Very cool.
But we're given two different stories, and that's kind of my point. Is we're told there's an emphasis on life, whereas and some power and the ability to. I mean, that's the thing with the Last Jedi versus Rise of Skywalker. Chuck versus Grasp, and I mean, we can feel differently about that scene and all that story, but and Luke's Force Ghost, confronting fear, is the legacy of the Jedi. But I love that line.
Mhm.
But I also like the see ya. So yeah, it's great. Speaking of High Republic on screen, one more thing to say. Well, actually, before I do that, what did you think of the first two episodes of Young Jedi Avengers we saw that you've seen?
Oh, I like them. They're very cute, very funny. I think my buddy Omar, if you will, listening,
Mhm.
said it's interesting. This is the least sassy Star Wars to ever sass.
Yes.
It's like all the characters are like sweet and nice to each other, and they don't like. There's no sarcasm. It's like
Yeah.
Star Wars is so used to sarcasm. It's like oh, these are little kids are like good job, like yay. So I think that's just kind of just totally like oh, I've never seen this before. This is kind of cute though.
Different.
But yeah, no, very different tone. But I like it. It's like very High Republic, gold robes, all
Yeah.
that stuff.
Yes.
Pirates is kind of the main baddie. So it's cute, and I like seeing Yoda. I always love seeing Yoda with kids. So
Yeah.
that's always fun. That's always I think Yoda with children has always sort of been a big thing since Attack of the Clones. So I think that there's something about that just keeps on going to this day.
I mean, even Yoda in Empire Strikes Back, where Luke is wanting the kid excitement, and Yoda says,
Yeah.
"Step up, you're
Yeah.
22-year-old man."
Bonk.
but still, yeah, and I mean, and Daniel Jose Older's young High Republic Adventures Phase 1, also Yoda with kids, so that's what he's up to. I think he always has a special ability to, or a special sense that kids can lead us and kids can show us the way forward in a way that other adults don't. Guy's 800, I guess at this point he's 750 years old, 700 years old by this point. So, he's still lived a long time. But yeah. Anyway, speaking of High Republic on screen, this is a spoiler, guys. I don't know if you know, but yes, Jedi Survivor. I'm watching a playthrough. I'm about 6 hours into a playthrough. Joel, you've seen the whole story, so you know how it is. I just want to see this one thing. I am so amazed that, like, how with Jedi Fallen Order, the ancient lore thing was the Zepho, or the kind of like exploring the past and going to a more mystical way of understanding the galaxy. For Jedi Survivor, exploring the past is in the High Republic and with Tanalorr. And I mean, I don't know what else reveals. I got to one point of one reveal that is pretty important in Phase 2 of the High Republic, but I don't know if that's going to play into it or not. Please don't spoil that for me. And I won't spoil what I'm thinking about. But I'm just really excited. Again, Jedi Survivor and the Acolyte, to me, again, it's my heyday that we're getting. My favorite thing in Star Wars right now. It is so popular, so big, and these books and these comics are so beloved that they finally realize, okay, we got to actually mine this before image. This how do we get from there to here in terms of the corruption of the Jedi and just the decadence and decay of the Jedi and the Republic. Let's mine this story for more compelling on screen. We heard from Leslie Headland what we're seeing with Jedi Survivor. So again, you've seen a whole playthrough. How long was your playthrough, by the way, that you saw? I
A
wonder if we saw the
couple
same one.
hours, like definitely 10,
Okay.
15. You
The one I
know,
saw is 17. I'm watching is 17, but
yeah, I've been seeing a lot of people are like, this is what's going to really mainstream the High Republic for people who don't care about the books or just didn't get into them. It's like to see it actually visualized
yeah,
is pretty compelling. But with this game, which already is going to have millions of people watching it, like more people are going to play this game than probably watch any of the Disney Plus shows or even read the books.
yeah,
That's the power of video games, folks. I think everyone underestimates the power of video games. They are the new movies. In terms of just like how much they can get
yeah.
widespread. And also, since we're here, it's gonna go back to what I was talking about a little bit earlier. It's sort of I've said it on Twitter. I'm curious how much Ahsoka is gonna give me Jedi Survivor vibes in the same way Kenobi felt like gave me Jedi Fallen Order vibes. Outside of the Force, that we go to the Inquisitor's, fortress. Um, and the biggest thing, and you've already seen this, and this is like the most minor thing,
Yeah.
so I don't mind talking about it. It's the color reddish orange. Um, I'm not gonna get into like whether the bad guy's lightsaber is reddish orange. It's like I think it is. I definitely know in Ahsoka it's a reddish orange with
Yeah.
the bearded dude Balin.
Mhm.
But regardless of the color or not, I wonder if that's an influence because you have in these characters Jedi. They're not Sith. They're not
Mhm.
Inquisitors. They're not. I mean, they didn't call me. I don't know if Balin's going to call himself something else, but the bad guy's not calling himself. I am a Jessis or a
Right.
Sisai or
I
something.
mean,
He's not
even a
making up.
gray Jedi.
It's like not even just talking about that. So
No.
I wonder if it's like this idea of they use the dark side, but they still mentally in their own little heads still consider themselves Jedi and following Jedi way. And the term dark Jedi has been a thing in the EU for a while. Our main topic,
Yeah.
we'll get into that later. Sometimes that gets interchanged with Sith and dark Jedi kind of got interchanged a lot early on. So it's sort of a non-distinction, although that was always used by actually, no. Sometimes even Sith themselves would call themselves Dark Jedi. It was weird. It was the 90s. It was
It's not consistent. It's also thousands and thousands of years of storytelling.
well, that's true. Years, just sometimes decades of out of universe storytelling.
Yeah,
So
that's
it's
true.
sort of like,
Yeah.
oh, it's like evil Sith, but it's like it's an evil Sith. This is an evil Jedi.
Yeah.
But I do wonder, for distinction's sake, if Balin and yeah, in
Yeah.
some ways.
I like
I
that.
mean, I guess that's Sam the Sham. Good point. Yeah, they are bad people with good intentions. Maybe Balon. I mean, you've seen the Jedi Survivor guy. He's a little more nuttier,
Yeah.
but maybe Balon is a little bit more. He's not the emperor. Mwahaha. He maybe sees himself as a more sophisticated man who's like, sometimes I use dark means to my
Yeah.
ends, but I am still civilized man, and I'm willing to negotiate with you, Ahsoka Tano, even though Ahsoka Tano is going to look at his methods and also his ideology and go like, you messed up, dude. So I do kind of wonder if that reddish orange color, which I think I'm noticing, is playing into a factor of this kind of tepid dark sideness compared to the Sith full on dark sideness, or even the
Yeah.
Inquisitors' loyalty to the Sith. But what do you guys think? I mean, did you think it was reddish orange, and just the overall thematics?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, and let us know in the comments if you come to that point in the story. What do you think? Yeah, I really like that bad people with good intentions. I mean, Thrawn himself, right? I keep on going back to this. And this is of course with the Zahn novels in my head, but all the Canon Zahn novels, especially in my head, is he really thinks he's doing well by his people. I mean, this even gets into the armor discussion. The armor goes into a different direction with this. The armor doesn't try and bombard an innocent city, but Thrawn, Thrawn, he thinks he's doing well, and he's willing to go to an extent to defend his people from the Grisks and to defend his people by using the Empire. We'll see how much that comes up in Ahsoka, but yeah, definitely, yeah, this idea of Dagon, is that his name? Who? Yeah,
Dagon. I think it's
Dagon.
Dagon or Dagon.
Dagon. And I mean, I am more comfortable with the word dark Jedi than gray Jedi. Because
Yeah. I guess.
dark Jedi. So in that case, Jedi, they're just using the word Jedi wrong.
Yeah.
A Jedi is a servant of the light. A dark Jedi is someone who thinks they're using the power of the Jedi, but for darkness, and so therefore they're effectively Sith. But yeah, let's go back to the comments here. Yeah, we were getting to a little bit of that, but also we were talking about young Jedi adventures, but that's okay. Last Jedi is Chuck Norris. I'll be curious to see what you think of that. There you go. And yeah, 6 point. Yellow and red makes orange. So,
I want to talk about that one just a little bit.
Yeah.
So, okay, semi spoiler, but not really. He bleed. My cat is messing around with my carrot. So the Dagon bleeds his lightsaber.
Yes.
Which, is what all Darksiders do. And yes, it is a yellow lightsaber. To be fair, I don't know if it's because it's yellow. I'm just saying he bleeds it and it gets that orangish color. But you bleed. If Vader bleeds a blue one, it's pure red. You can bleed a green one. I've never seen a green one get bled, but I'm going to assume it just turns red if it's by a Sith Lord. So, you could bleed it's bleeding the crystal, but I wonder if because Dagon, I'm just calling him Dagon because Dagon's a cool name. Because Dagon's only so far tapping into the dark side, it's it's not a full dark side.
He's just committing. He's refusing to commit.
Committee. I mean, it's also interesting, and obviously you go back to Dark Jedi for a second, to kind of get to our future discussion about the expanded universe. That was a thing that was called. They used the term dark. They've never Gray Jedi is a fan thing. It was never used in any book. I don't think any book ever officially used it. Dark Jedi though has been an official lore name. Sometimes it's interchangeable with Sith for reasons. It was the 90s, so we didn't really have anything nailed down. Later on, it was sort of that was what Asajj Ventress was because she wasn't the Sith. She was just a Jedi, Dark Jedi, because she kind of had Force powers. There were lots of. That's fair. I don't know. There aren't a lot of yellow.
I want to answer that one then. Yes, Temple Guards by the Late Republic, but in the High Republic, it was just one option among many. So I don't know if it necessarily means. Mean that, but because the Grand Inquisitor was a Temple Guard. I want to say one point, and then I'll let you get back to that. You want to talk about mixing? One guy we keep talking about, especially with Boba Fett, is this Mace guy with this lightsaber that is a mix between blue and red. I'll see, especially because we saw Keller and Beck, and how Lucasfilm is say, Keller and okay, Ahmed, we love you. If you want Keller in an actual story, he can't have a purple lightsaber because that doesn't work. So, blue and red. I don't know. We'll see. Anyway, sorry. Go ahead. What were you talking about? Dark Jedi
colors are always going to be somewhat based on
what's Vern's lightsaber color? I'm gonna look this up.
Doesn't she have a light whip?
Yeah, she's a light whip. That's a lightsaber.
That was green.
It's pink. It's pink.
Okay, it's pink.
That's cute. That's great.
Again, I don't know. This color orange though has been popping up. It's definitely in Ahsoka. I think even Filoni himself said it was intentional. The reddish orange and not the full on Sith red, which maybe is an indication of just kind of different Darksiders and how much into the dark side we're really tapping into it.
Okay. Here's a great point. I didn't notice that part. Fair enough. Also, again, in the High Republic, there you can in Jedi Fallen Order, you can get a nice orange creamsicle, and it's not dark. But yeah, DNF 105. That's the thing we got to go to. We got to ask the question. It's an intentional choice by the designers. So.
Yeah. So that's I think the color orangish reddish is gonna mean something maybe. But certainly, even if it doesn't, you got to admit, Dagon and Balon seem to be in this sort of Dark Jedi camp, essentially. They are, we'll just call them that. They are Dark Jedi.
Sure. It'd be interesting to see if they use a term in Ahsoka, but and we can talk about what Dark Jedi meant. Is in a bunch of terms. Speaking of terms and defining terms, let's talk about a term: the expanded universe.
Yes, the
How about that for a
topic
segue?
has
I'm good at segues.
the topic has come. All right. So the expanded universe. Fans have been using this term for Lord knows how long. Really think it kicked off in the 90s. If you really think about it. So I think if we want to explore this term, we gotta go over the evolution of this term. What it is meant throughout the history of Star Wars. Because it has, I think, somewhat changed, somewhat not, and somewhat always has. I had to think of a third thing to make it poetic. I want to be poetic.
Yes.
So I would say, yeah, kind of three big moments.
Mhm.
You could argue 1977 was the Splinter of the Mind's Eye, but I would argue 1991 to
Yeah.
2008 in particular, when we cemented expanded universe, was pretty much just shorthand for anything really that has nothing to do with George Lucas's direct involvement or even his biggest involvement, which was pretty much his 6-movie saga.
Mhm.
Episode 1 through episode 6, Turn the Jack. That was it. And everything else was expanded universe.
Mhm.
The movies didn't have to work with everything else, and everything else had to work with the movie. So that was the expanded universe, simple, clean. 2008, where I think is when the term starts to get a little wonky with the Clone Wars show. Because in a lot of ways, I consider the Clone Wars show to be George Lucas's own attempt to do his expanded universe. Beyond the Skywalker saga and beyond just that family, or beyond Anakin, I guess, was Glory the Mandalorians and the Underworld and clones and other things.
Mhm.
So that was George's attempt of expanded universe beyond you had a 6-movie saga, then you had the Clone Wars now, then you kind of had everything else. But that's
Mhm.
when the term expanded universe really kind of gets messy, because it's sort of like, well, technically doesn't really mean anything not George Lucas related, because you have Clone Wars,
Mhm.
but Clone Wars isn't just. I mean, I know some people like to kind of be hardcore and say it's the saga, but it's like I see it as like this is George's attempt at expanded universe, like with the Jedi and the Sith and all in the ancient, what expanding Star Wars beyond his original, the story of Darth Vader.
Mhm.
The 1 through 6 is the story of Vader. Clone Wars is the story of the Clone Wars,
Interesting.
and with Ahsoka kind of as your main lead.
Anakin happens to be in there too. So
Well, yeah, I mean, you can
yeah.
have characters, in non-expanded universe stuff. I mean, Luke
Yeah.
Skywalker is part of the expanded universe and all those
Gotcha.
characters. So then you get 2012, although the reboot doesn't really happen to 2013, but the buyout happens, and then Disney says it's all technically one universe now. We start with 1 through 6 as our baseline,
Mhm.
and then Clone Wars is obviously part of that too, and then everything else is now going to be part of this singular universe. A video game character can appear in a TV show. A book character can appear in a video game, which can appear in a TV show. Like Vanessa's gonna do this
Yeah.
month,
Sure.
like Cobb Vance did. All that stuff. There's no real barrier anymore. It
Mhm.
is all one Star Wars.
There's the term canon.
And that's where canon comes in. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and although the old expanded universe had a canon, it had a continuity. I
Mhm.
don't think it's like to say it was this weird detached thing. I mean, post Endor, you had Thrawn trilogy that then bled into Jedi Academy, which we have story arcs
Yeah.
like Mara Jade and Pelion and Card and the whole Yuzon Vong thing and Jason Solo going from birth to death. So,
Yeah.
so there's that. So there's the broad
Yeah.
kind of terminology history of the expanded universe up to today. But I
No, I just want to say
before?
it's interesting that little bit with 2008, and I know we're going to get to that more, but with the Clone Wars, remember back to Collider Jedi Council, and I've mentioned this a few times, and they did this interesting thing because this was the thinking at the time, I guess 2015, 2016, just as everything was starting to take off. They divided the show into two parts. It was well, they don't have the show into two parts. The first section, they had a section called "What's the Deal with Canon?" And Canon specifically did include the TV shows, did include Clone Wars, did include rumors about the Mandalorian or whatever that was going to be. but the first thing was just the films, just the sequel trilogy, and how. So what that reflects then is how TV shows were considered, like you're saying with George Lucas, considered this expanded canon thing happening, because the real distinction is films versus everything else, and how Disney Plus changed all that. But that's a later discussion.
Yeah. I mean, Clone Wars is weird because it's both Legends and canon, like Bo-Katan, both world. That's only because later EU books, when Clone Wars were coming out, started incorporating Clone Wars direct stuff, like whether Talzin, Mor's Gods, all that stuff. But not going to do that. That's beyond our pay grade right now. That's too confusing. So, yeah. So officially now, it is all canon. It is all officially one thing.
Officially,
but. I want to kind of talk about why we still kind of, that term sticks around even today. Because I do think that unofficially, there was never a clone attack on Camino. I'm sorry, I do stuff like that. Unofficially, from like the kind of the artistic kind of thing that we're getting into, there is always going to be somewhat this divide between, especially the 1 through 6 films, and I'm going to include 7 through 9 because they want to be part of George's thing. That's very much what they're trying to be. And then kind of everything else beyond the saga. So now we kind of have, unofficially, you have the saga 1 through 9, Skywalker saga about the family, and then everything else. I would like, you mean the canon means in this context? You mean the context of Disney era?
I think maybe to answer your question, I think what we're doing is kind of digging into some of the vagueness and fuzziness about that, because there is that term canon, as if everything is all one, and then there's this Legends thing, which was canon, but it was this other EU, but now we're talking about what might, and this is the next thing, but we'll get to that in a bit. What does expanded universe? What could that be? Some sort of middle, I don't know, middle. I'm curious, Joel, as to what you're thinking. But yeah,
it's a lot of weird fuzziness terminology for sure, especially now, because in the old days, like I said, early on, it was a hard distinction.
Right.
Well, that's just because the continuity of that Plagueis book includes a bunch of stuff that sometimes is irreconcilable or just no longer applies. Like in the book, Dooku and Palpatine aren't in league with each other, and clearly in Tale of the Jedi they were in league during Phantom Menace. That's more like small continuity issues, and I can get into a whole thing of like the spirit of Legends versus the letter of Legends, where it's like, yeah, there's a lot of things that spiritually could fit in canon, but there's a lot of small details and stuff and organizations that no longer exist and storylines. But I think that's less of a canon versus, that's continuity.
Yeah. Okay.
Which is, I think, a different thing. At least for me. But let's get back to it. Let's back to it. So, and I was saying, early on there was a clear distinction. 6-movie saga about the Skywalkers, or I guess Anakin time. Everything else was like stories about the Mandalorian, stories about Revan, Ancient Sith, Thrawn, Yuzan Vong, all this stuff. 2012 comes. Now it's all supposed to be one thing. It's all one big universe, and it all can intersect. But again, to get to the unofficial stuff, I think there is still somewhat a mini divide. It's not official, but it's sort of like in the artistic intense sense between Lucas's 6-movie saga and 7 through 9, which is now the Skywalker saga, and kind of everything else. And that's kind of where I think why, in some ways, the term expanded universe unofficially can still apply, because the expanding of the universe sometimes doesn't always line up nicely with that 1 through 9 saga. I'll give you obviously the best example is always going to be, Luke's Yoda saying, when gone am I, the last of the Jedi will you be? In 1983, that was very much, Luke, you are the last Jedi. All the other Jedi are probably dead. Go, you gotta confront Vader, dude. And I think 7 through 9, because I think they're more focused on the saga than the rest of the other stuff going on. Still from an artistic inherent standpoint,
Okay.
wants to very much still say Luke was the last Jedi at that time. And then obviously, and then when Last Jedi comes out, I will not be the last Jedi. Boom, it's Rey. Rey is now the mantle holder.
Mm-hmm.
But from a Saga sense, I think that's like the story being told. But then when you get to New Jedi Order Rey movie, which I don't think is going to be called Episode 10, I don't want it to be called Episode 10. I want it to kind of be again, kind of in this unofficial expanded universe thing. We might find out, Luke had some students that survived, or like, hey, look, a mini Jedi Order that survived, on a planet. Hey, want to help me out? I was actually I'm not really the last Jedi from the spiritual sense. And that's why, and then you got other things like Ahsoka, who's like, oh, I was around the whole time during the original trilogy, and now, or Cal Kestis, they were doing stuff, or like even things that are kind of so closely intertwined, like Rogue One and stuff like that, or it's like Kenobi battling Inquisitors and dealing with Reva. It's sort of like officially, yes, it's all canon; it can all connect. Nothing is going to stop them from putting Reva in somewhere else or anything like that. But there's always kind of that unofficial, like, here's the story of the Skywalkers now, the Lucas thing, even though 7 through 9 doesn't have Lucas thing, but it's trying to be Lucas's thing, kind of tied in there. And then you kind of everything else, which is kind of free to do whatever it wants, more or less.
True.
And that's kind of where I feel like the term expanded universe still kind of applies in an unofficial sense, because officially for years it's always Lucas's thing, and then this kind of broader story universe that's being told around it. And I feel like we have that again. It's just it's now more official, but in the same way, there's still kind of this tier, because I feel like, and I'm sorry I'm rambling, but it's my only way to get it all out of my head, because nothing from the other expanded universe material ever really affected 7 through 9, but it could have, but it didn't. You got Ahsoka in Force Ghosty and Kanan Jarrus, but that's so minimal I don't even bother to count it. It'd be like if Saw Gerrera got mentioned in one of these movies, or Ahsoka actually showed up in one of these movies, or I don't know, something from like the High Republic Jedi all showed up, or something like that, where it's like the expanded universe or the non-saga material really felt affecting the plot of the movies. But because it does feel sort of 7 through 9 still feel kind of semi-isolated, it does still feel like Lucas's saga. Everything else, even though it's building itself a universe and a continuity. And that's why I still feel like that term expanded universe in a way still kind of applies, even if officially, internally, it probably doesn't. And that's kind of my big argument. I'll let you talk now and kind of see.
So I think I noticed myself, but the light bulb come on is okay. This is what you're talking about. This is what you're talking. You're not really talking about anything outside the films. What you're talking primarily is the relationship of the films to themselves, and
books and comics and everything else too.
But specifically, the relationship of the films to themselves is one coherent whole. I mean, we can talk about minor differences there, but that they don't refer to anything outside, in part because Rogue One and Solo were even the fact that you don't count Rogue One and Solo in this, because they were made after all those stories were done, and they don't actually refer beyond the original trilogy. So I see what you mean, what you're getting at. This has nothing to do with anything else. It's just to say 1 through 9 are only self-referential to themselves.
Yes, exactly.
Whereas everything else can be self-referential to each other, has to be self-referential. It can be referential to each other, has to refer to the films, obviously. Even talking about High Republic and how that is ultimately about where we get to in Episode 1 and Episode 3. I always say the endpoint of the High Republic is Order 66. That's even though we know formally it's not, but that's a moment in the films that the films itself don't refer to the High Republic. So okay, I get what you mean there, in part because the popularity, and I think it's out of universe, the popularity of the films are so much higher. Popularity of the saga films are higher than the standalone films. Where I can see this, well, I mean, it won't matter. I mean, if we have a 10, 11, 12, that'll break that. I guess it's kind of, I mean, I guess what you're saying here is here are these films. It's a fixed. It's a fixed text. It's not a fixed artifact. Now that it's done, that we
Right.
can actually look at it. I mean, that's the thing. Is the only way to break that is if you have a 10, 11, 12 that would refer probably to other things, because now, I mean, you're not debating my paper versus screen thing, right?
No.
But you're kind of working with the distinction itself. You're just saying there's also this other very similar distinction.
That's why I had Saga Canon is kind of the as
Yeah.
a thing, because and maybe that's just how the card was dealt. I mean, I know Colin wanted to do Mortis, and how that would have gone down. I don't know, but 7 through 9, even Last Jedi don't really reference the expanded universe. There is no Ray Sloan mention. There is no Gallius Rax mention. There is it's more building on what the other Saga films there, 7 as well, and not like 9 might have Palpatine clones, sure, but that's not really a reference to Aftermath. That's just because Palpatine's talking about immortality. He's always been kind of weird like that. That's the references. So the Saga films have always been more referential to themselves than say Rogue One, which was it brought in Saw Gerrera. I mean, it brought in Jedha. It made Mon Mothma an important player. I guess that's sort of both. That is both. I mean, obviously, you have to turn the Jedi, but Mon Mothma being important and a character, that's an expanded universe thing more than she's more an expanded universe character than she has ever been. Got the Ghost Crew in it, had General Harrison Duel. I mean, that's a smaller thing, obviously. And then you got shows like Mandalorian, which they brought in Cobb Vanth, that was referencing Aftermath. So that's why, and things like, Ahsoka is alive and other Jedi are around. Those are very expanded universe-y ideas compared to 7 through 9, which I felt were like, if they were doing research, they most researched the Saga. I mean, I know Josh looked up something for like a force power for Luke in a book, but in kind of the meta artisty texty thing, the Saga is very much insular with itself. And you told talk about 10, 11, 12. It might be a way to break that if that's what they want to do. But that's honestly why I kind of don't want a 10, 11, 12. I just want Rey movie number 1, and then, or New Jedi Order movie 1, the Reying, and then movie 2, the Rey Strikes Back. To kind of distinguish this was the Saga. This is now this new thing, and it's just going to keep moving the timeline forward.
I mean, that's another way of saying it. Is a way of saying that the Skywalker saga is over. And that they won't be added to, because it had to be focused on this one through line of this one family. And interestingly, I mean, it's over in part because the last remaining Skywalker is not a Skywalker; she's a Palpatine, and so, unless she's pregnant with Solo. I really hope that's not the case, but
I mean, and also just I think, just from kind of the out of universe fan perspective, it's like we gotta move forward, man. It's like we can talk about honoring George Lucas all we want, but it's like it's its own thing now. We don't need wipes. We can do end credit scenes. We can do crossovers.
Do flashbacks.
We can do flashbacks.
You have Wookiee Jedi.
We have Wookiee Jedi. We don't have to. I mean, I think the Saga could have, we can have Jedi. They didn't have to be the Last Jedi. There were other. There were other Jedi around, and I think, you can say, that ruins it's sort of why I don't care anymore about the whole when gone am I the last of the Jedi will you be? Because to me, it's sort of like the Skywalker saga is the story of that family. It's sort of why, I've shown you stuff about how I don't even agree with the whole the prequels are the story of the failure of the Jedi. No, there's the story of the fall of Anakin and his bad choices. And we did a whole Filoni and George thing of how they see that differently. And I don't want to get too much into that. If you want to make other stories about other things, go ahead. But that's now this story And even if you have Skywalker Saga characters like Vader, like Luke, like Rey, now it's not a Skywalker Saga story. It's just the new thing, which is going to make this new Jedi Order film really interesting. If it's not called Episode 10, which I don't think it's going to, at least I kind of hope not. Because they're like, even if you come out, if it's saying, well, this is Episode 10 and everything but name, well, again, not really, because they don't want it to be. They want it to start some new stuff and hopefully successful stuff that we can keep making and keep expanding upon. Here's some interesting quote just to kind of read. The EU flows from the Saga films in only one direction, with the CT aliens appearing in later material. I mean, that's fair. The journey to books has very little to do with what could ultimately appear on film. I mean, that's true too.
That's kind of what you're getting at. How they just didn't refer to things they could have.
Well, what's weird about it is less. I mean, yes and no.
What thing that happened? Because
maybe because Rey's alive. I don't know.
Oh, because Rey's a Skywalker.
I mean, she is a Skywalker, but it's like, is Luke appearing in a? But it's sort of like, is a Luke movie a Skywalker Saga movie? Like if they call it Luke. Yeah, even Kenobi, which I kind of
Kenobi or Ahsoka. I mean, Ahsoka's in like Kenobi. Yeah, Kenobi and Ahsoka are the two shows that are going to be most tied in.
Yeah, but it's still part of that expanded universe, in my opinion. Even I don't get me wrong, I love Kenobi, and I think it adds a lot for sure. And it's definitely a good addition to the narrative if you want to view it that way. And I do, because I like looking at Star Wars as a whole. But at the end of the day, 1 through 6 and 1 through 9 is still this thing, this insular thing.
Yeah.
It didn't reference Kenobi. Well, Kenobi came later, obviously, so that doesn't help either. But Kenobi's still this insular thing. I mean, the Saga is still this insular thing. Kenobi's this new thing. It's building itself around the Saga for sure. But I still would count it more, but I think other things that are not the Saga have a far chance of referencing it than Saga itself, because the Saga's over. And also kind of, well, you did your thing already. So, I don't know.
So I'll say two things about your overall thesis here is, again, I get it tracks in terms of, I mean, the classic thing, you're going to ask J.J. Abrams and Rian Johnson to read these novels. You have to use this thing, and you have to reference this event that happened, even in Clone Wars and Rebels or whatever, they're not going to do that. Kathleen Kennedy wasn't going to do that. The thing I always bring up, Wedge Antilles, Tem and Wexley Antilles crashes his X-Wing fighter and dies in a blaze of glory. And then Wedge Antilles, hey, I'm here to save the day, everybody. And so this gets at what you're saying. It also gets at why, where it still works, but the thing I've been saying for the last year and a half is, all these other stories also affect the way we interpret the films.
Oh, right? Yeah.
And so, and that's what, say, Kenobi is doing, is this interpolation. It's an interpretation of Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope, but it's also an interpolation of saying, okay, why is Kenobi all of a sudden, well, not all of a sudden, but we leave him, the Order has fallen, his family's destroyed, he's out in the middle of nowhere 10 years later in the middle of Tatooine watching over Luke. But 10 years later we see expectedly he's very like Luke on Octo, he's very much given up. He's packaging meat and helping Luke and Ben and Owen and Beru as much as they can, but kind of given up. He's still lamenting the loss of Anakin. Then he's able to turn, and this is the linchpin, he's able to turn and move towards Luke and Leia. And so that's that has an impact on why we see then in A New Hope Leia's hologram, help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi, you're my only hope. How much that adds to that moment. The big thing I think about there is, even within the Lucas saga, the relationship between films was mutable. And so, I mean, the classic example of Vader Luke and Leia being family, the thing we're talking about, Skywalkers. In 1977, George Lucas didn't know that. By 1979, by 1980, we all have "I Am Your Father." And then 1983, we have "And You Have a Sister," and so all that, and then we have to watch A New Hope differently now, right? The larger scale, and this is one of my prequelist tenets, really, how the original trilogy was irrevocably changed, the text itself. And so this is what we're getting at: is what is the text? This is this meta conversation that we had about a year and a half ago, right? If you want to go back to our Eye on Canon channel, find that, but I'll recap it again, right? A text does, on one level, it does exist. I don't know. Here, this Lando comic. It exists and contained, and it is what it is. But when I read it, I'm going to interpret and I'm going to respond to it in a different way than you are, because we're different people. We have different contexts and whatnot. A better one. This character here. Say if you read this cold and not know what's going on, this one refers to everything that's happened over a number of years in her life, her story. Who is this Santa character? Who's this Magda Tolvin character? It's just a different interpretation. Is it a different text? Maybe. That's the thing. It's a different book. In 1999 into 2005, the original trilogy became 3 different films than they were before. And, because before some things were vague, Yoda and Obi-Wan on a log, they could have been reminiscing about anything that fits their description vaguely. And we did an interesting episode with Cal Katarn a while back. Leia and Luke's mother could have been anyone fitting Leia's description. Also, there's the fuzziness of the details. I'll get to that in a second. Watching the original trilogy after 2005, all those are set. That's a different text. Obi-Wan and Yoda are recalling nothing other than the very events we see in the prequel trilogy. Leia is only talking about Padme. Maybe Brea. Maybe knows. There we go. There's the cat. There we go. Good job. And again, of course, with both examples, with Obi-Wan Yoda, with Leia and Luke and Leia and their mother, the details are fuzzy. We know that. But now we can. I would argue maybe we have to have an in-universe interpretation that is a function of memory, and especially childhood memory with Leia, rather than the fact that George Lucas just hadn't nailed down those details yet, or decided to change the details with the timeline with Leia and Padme and their mother. I remember my mother, that whole thing. So, again, I get what you're saying in terms of actual concrete story decisions, artistic decisions, but so it works on both levels. This is what I'm saying. I'm not disagreeing with you. It works on both levels. There is the text in itself, insane in Latin. There's also the text. I think Din will appreciate this as the song in itself, and then there's the song with the crowd and the audience, and how 2 different things. So,
I'd like to expand on this idea of text a little bit. So, because I think what I'm trying to get at is, in a weird way, people. I can't be silly. People, I think, can rightfully argue Star Wars is one singular story. I take a little issue with that, not in kind of that sense of I like seeing how things in the High Republic affect, Jedi Fallen Order and stuff like that, and kind of in the historical sense. But in kind of the artistic meta sense, I think I'm not a fan of necessarily looking at every entry in Star Wars as a singular book. I would argue 1 through 9 is one book, one singular book called The Skywalker Saga. It's a little weird, because it's sort of it was originally one person, and then obviously, the sequels kind of brought 2 more people in. Just kind of making this odd epilogue, but it's there. It's now that the Skywalker Saga.
The Rise of Skywalker is part of the Skywalker Saga.
Yeah, Mandalorian. Mandalorian. people say, "Oh, it's episode 7.9." I don't agree with that. I think Mandalorian, it's another book.
Yeah.
That Mandalorian, another book. Ahsoka, another book.
Hmm.
Maybe you could argue the Filoni film is part of it's a bigger book, but I won't get into. It's gonna get a little weird. Andor, its own book. Rogue One, its own book. The Rey film, yeah, Rey's a Skywalker. Deal with it, but it's a different book. I don't think it's part of the Skywalker saga. It might come off that way maybe when you watch it because that's kind of what they wanted to do, but also they want to do its own thing. But that series will be its own book, an own book series. High Republic books is its own mega book in itself. I would even argue the Clone Wars series, the series that has Anakin, Obi-Wan, Padme, Dooku. That's a different book. That's not the Sky. That's not an addition. It is built upon the foundation of the prequels for sure, but it's its own book. That's just true. But I would argue, but I see that's sort of where I kind of would come at it. It's sort of like I think you have some people. I mean, it's not wrong to like read a book and then look at a different book another way for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, and I'm not saying you can't do that. In fact, do what you want. But I kind of feel like it's more like when you take the hard stance of like, this is one big book. It's called Star Wars.
Yeah.
And, if you want to have that perspective, sure. That's all well good. I do too. I love seeing how Vader. But it's like even the Vader comics. It's about Darth Vader, the chosen one himself. I think that they're different books. I don't think they are Skywalker Saga. It's not part of the Skywalker Saga.
Right.
I think even Vader having his own adventures is not part of the Skywalker Saga book. It's a different book. It just happens to be about Vader. I know that sounds a little weird to say, but it's sort of like, again, in terms of like the text, when you're reading the text after, Empire Return of the Jedi, Vader's not going, I had to deal with Kira, and then all this stuff with Afra, and some Vermata cage, like this would Vader, this Death Star thing better work out. The Vermata cage incident made me tired.
I mean, a comic book might actually do that dialogue.
But in terms of text, I see them as different text, even if it's all part of this singular universe. And kind of like it's like I don't know, it's like if the Bible's got multiple books. Like
I was just gonna say,
book of this and book of that and book of him and book of them and blah blah blah. I don't remember all the books' names, but I think it's like Star Wars too, and also just different authors having different interpretations of the universe and writing different text and stories with it. And obviously that's when the whole is it canon, is it not thing comes in. Obviously they are all canon. They all can affect each other, and all the authors are going to build off each other. Obviously, we are seeing that both in film and on screen. But I think kind of if you want to, it's almost like we're asking. It's kind of like you kind of got two groups of people. Ones who love to see the text as fluid, which I do inherently. I don't think I'm saying I never do.
Yeah.
But if you're like looking at the original text and trying to see like what is the original interpretation of the text, then you kind of have to almost look at it very differently, even though if you're, especially depending on how you're looking at it. Again, if you're looking at 1 through 6 as a singular text, then that's what is George's whole overarching thing with 1 through 6. Again, if you're looking at 1 through 9, if you're looking at through 4 through 5, you would throw through 9, etc. But I'll let you talk now.
That's really interesting. You use the technology of the book or the technology of the codex, which because that developed at least in the West in the Middle Ages, and how that is where we get this idea of one self-contained linear progression, because that's how you read a book, right? You open it up, you go from one to another. I mean, before that there was a scroll, the papyrus scroll, which you also had to be linear and had to be contained, and those two technologies are similar. It is easier to flip back and forth in a book. But then you see back there, you stick them on these literal books, the Star Wars book. You stick them on a shelf next to each other, and you pull one out, you put one back. Yeah, so I do see what you're saying. In that, I mean, I will say what we said before is Mando 1 to 3, 1, 2, and 3, Book of Boba Fett, Ahsoka, and Ahsoka Skeleton Crew.
It's part of the same book series. If you
Those
want to
are
use more
I'd say
modern.
those are one book.
Okay, interesting.
And then the finale to that book is the big film, the Filoni film. I'd say that. But yeah, I mean, I do get what you're saying. What maybe we're getting at is Star Wars then is a library, an interconnected library collection of it's a series, it's a saga. But yeah, I mean,
franchise.
a franchise. Dan has this great point. There's one series that's called A Book of Boba Fett. So yeah, I mean, I think what we're getting at here is there really is a both and in this, and that because that's the thing with the Bible, right? It is a both and in that there are, and you don't want to talk about original intent, right? There, we believe maybe there was this guy called. Well, this is an interesting example. Here we go. I'm doing this. This is happening. So there's a guy. Guy called. Oh, here's an example. What's a good example? We really believe there was this guy called Isaiah, and he really
real name.
Yeah, real guy. He lived at this certain time, and he set out to write this prophecy about about the Israelites from a certain time period and how they were going to get taken away into exile. So that's only Isaiah 1 to 39. And then School of Isaiah later on says, okay, well, we're in the exile. We believe we're actually going to be returned back. We have a different perspective, a different aim. We're going to just stick on our collection onto his and say, okay, now actually here's how it works with Star Wars. Okay, that's like 40 to, I don't know, 56 or something. And then there's a third Isaiah, but it's all called Isaiah, called one book. That's kind of like this original Isaiah is George Lucas, and then you have J.J. Abrams and Ryan Johnson sticking on, but that's just one book, one initial thing.
It's funny. Something it's like, does the Bible have like an author who's like a George, and then you just answered it. So yeah,
sure.
It's like,
well, isn't it multiples? But is that? But then here's maybe this is kind of what maybe expanded universe. This doesn't fully work, but then you get this. Well, we get this guy named Jesus, but you get this community of people named this guy named Mark, and then this other guy, maybe with his community, they're named Matthew and Luke, and they're looking at Isaiah and looking back, saying, "Oh yeah, this Jesus guy did things sort of like that. Let's interpret Isaiah in light of what Jesus does." Among other, for example, so there's a very famous chapter in the second Isaiah, where the group of people who are going from exile. Sorry, I'm really nerding out. This is twice in one episode.
No, that's fine. Go ahead.
So, yeah, and I'm trying to think. I'm trying to get back on track here, but so there's a chapter in the second part of Isaiah talking about a suffering servant who is going to redeem the world, and initially that means Israel in exile is going to suffer and then be redeemed for the world and in God's big plan. The early Christians look back and say, oh, this is like what happens with Jesus on the cross. Okay, we're going to actually now interpret Isaiah differently because of what happens with Jesus later. I think that kind of sort of works in what I'm getting at, in that it works through the library. The story moves through the library across the different books. And so, I guess what I'm saying is I like to emphasize the connections, and you do too. But
oh yeah,
it is helpful. and this has been the debate in biblical scholarship for the last 200 years, especially. It is helpful to look at what this first Isaiah, chapters 1 to 39, what this guy cared about, what this guy wanted to do, and we want to say, but then also to reflect on what that might mean for the wider story, but also how does the wider story reflect on that. So it goes both ways. It's all over the place. Yeah.
The way this is how I will try to modernize your words to kind of
Yeah.
to try to simplify it. It'd be like, okay, like Isaiah's George, he wrote the original book, and then somebody came and then he's like, and then like, okay, fans, here it is, but I'm also gonna let you write stories in this universe I made. And then it's like, well, I'm going to write about this character who teamed up with Jesus and fought some bad guys. And then like, oh, I'm going to write about this group of rogue scoundrels who were around during this time. They fought the Romans. You know, and I'm going to kind of add to just modern context now. Like we did see all, let's go back to kind of modern context. What makes Star Wars so unique about the expanded universe is George essentially just let most of his franchise, really from the 90s or even earlier, if you want to get to the Marvel comics, essentially allowed for official fan fiction.
Yeah, that's what you're getting at here.
And they called it canon, and they built a continuity. Originally in the 90s, it built a continuity. You had Tim Zahn, and then Kevin J. Anderson, Tom Veitch, Stackpole, all fans of Star Wars.
Yeah.
George hired them because they were professional novelists, obviously.
Yeah, they knew what they were doing too. Yeah.
I mean, obviously, that's important. They're not going to hire, somebody off the internet, but they were official novelists, and it's like, hey, you can essentially write Star Wars fan fiction, put your own OCs. You can maybe use some of my characters, and I'm not going to honor it because at the end of the day, it's my film, it's my world. But you can all build your own little continuity up, and the only difference is now is that they're doing the same thing. It's just, I would argue, movies and TV shows are part of it because what is all this but just very big budget fan fiction? And I don't want to say that it's disparaging. It follows the themes, but it's like, what is fan fiction but fiction of a universe that's not the original creator involved? You can make fan fiction. I can make fan fiction.
Yeah.
It is both of the original. It's using the works of the original creator, but telling your own story from it. That's what very much D&D is all about to a certain extent. You built the universe, and now you get to play in it. So yeah, just trying to see here. I feel like we've kind of said our piece to a certain extent, but I just kind of want to see if you had any
Then I was referring to my bookshelf of novels here. We always have the Jedi library, but
I got my own little mini Jedi library behind me. Actually, this is an actual. These are actually
although that works perfectly, right? The Jedi archive.
These are actually history books of real books.
So the answer is yes. We always refer to libraries.
You're talking about the actual background. Yeah. I thought we were talking about our rooms. It's like, these are history books for one thing.
What was I saying? In terms of the fan fiction thing, I mean, I do see what you're saying. Again, this especially works if the Skywalker saga is over, because this is it. That's all we got. George Lucas isn't around to tinker and insert Ahsoka into A New Hope, right? He's not going to do that.
This is actually kind of the weird thing about the little bits and pieces, and who knows how much it would have changed if George saw it through. Where you start and where you end is always going to be different. So everyone gets kind of up in arms about like, oh my god, they were going to use this concept. It's like, they're concepts. Once you actually start shooting, you kind of have to really nail it down. You kind of have, and then you can kind of go in a completely opposite direction. But it would have been interesting, kind of,
the Controversial film.
Well, not even just that too, but even Lucas is like bringing back Maul and sort of like that's such a Clone Wars specific thing, and that's such a reference to Clone Wars. That kind of honestly in a weird way would have elevated Clone Wars even more in terms of its kind of importance to it being part of the text, but because it didn't happen, now I kind of think there's Clone Wars a different text.
I mean, Solo,
again,
the Solo reveal, it would have, but Solo, if you're in your scheme here, is still an EU.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I would argue that's why Clone Wars, in kind of the meta artsy tech sense, is sort of for new canon's sake is the new foundation of the EU because so many story plots are being
Sure.
if you look at modern Star Wars, and I kind of said this a little bit about Mandalorian being like the cartoons in a certain extent, but if you look at honestly a lot of modern Star Wars that's not the saga, most of it's all coming from Clone Wars, even more than 1 through 4. I mean, 1 through 6 at this point. I mean, obviously, you get characters like Vader showing up, but sort of like the Mandalorian. Where did that arc start? In Clone Wars. Where the Solo stuff? Clone Wars. Mortis, the Ahsoka stuff? Clone Wars. Andor, Saw Gerrera? Clone Wars. Like, if anything, modern Star Wars is more of a continuation of Clone Wars than it even is of 1 through 6. The only thing that I honestly think is a continuation of more 1 through 6 and kind of pulls more from that is Kenobi, the sequels. That's kind of it.
Maybe Andor. No, Andor still got Saw Gerrera.
Andor's like a hybrid for sure, but Rogue One is more of a build-up of Clone Wars. So I don't want to give too hard labels to any of this really, but if you just kind of look at it, it's sort of like kind of the foundations of it all. It's sort of like Clone Wars is way more than even George's 1 through 6. I mean, obviously 1 through 6 is where Clone Wars starts from. So but kind of like the branches and all.
Sure. I mean, even it almost to say Clone Wars is somewhere in the middle, right?
It certainly can get.
It has its own.
It does walk both worlds.
Yeah, it's this is what you're saying. It's foundational in the way that the films can be, but maybe more so just given what the stories that they're telling. Because maybe they're more afraid to touch those. Because I mean, that's another thing with the medium. It's the medium of a television show, and the medium of a television show taking the time to explore these things. Yeah.
To use the text metaphor again, Clone Wars is if George had written another book, like Skywalker Saga 1 through 6, and then Glare decide, I'm going to make another book.
Yeah.
Clone Wars. They're going to use all the same characters, but it's another book. And now and most people are using that book as kind of their kind of lore in the other book. I mean, obviously, but it still kind of comes from the same creator.
And it's also why after after 2012, Clone Wars is still completely canon, right? It survived the changeover because it's a George Lucas thing. So
that's
he wouldn't have sold it to Disney because it's his baby, really. I wonder if George Lucas feels. Here's the thing. Here's a way of putting it. I think George Lucas loves Clone Wars as much as he loves the Saga films. Like he feels as connected and as dear to it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
he was definitely. I mean, Clone Wars is kind of what kind of got him a little bit more reinvigorated to do 7 through 9 before he realized I'm old and I'm gonna get tired. I don't have the energy anymore. But one thing to do a cartoon, it's another thing to do a whole movie again. So I mean, he really got involved with Clone Wars, but it's sort of like, it's sort of like. It's sort of like it's always more like a fan thing for me where I get a little annoyed of like Clone Wars episode 3.5 or 2.9 or something like that. If you truly believe that, that's fine. But I like to look at Clone Wars as a different text by the same author. If we're using kind of the text metaphor,
the only thing.
No,
you finish.
What?
There you go.
It's not like with the prequels where it's like he took the OT text, he took the book, and like, well, I'm gonna just add pages in the back and start writing it. It didn't like stuff the Clone Wars into another book. He decided, no, this is a separate book.
Yeah. The only thing I will use the point whatever is for Kenobi. That to me is the closest we get from what I was saying before. The hinge for Obi-Wan, which is a major character in both trilogies, a very important character in both trilogies. That's his hinge. So that's the only time, because it also deals with Anakin and Vader. So, but again, I do see what you mean. Like it's Deborah Chow interpreting and interpolating, right?
Yeah, like totally. Like I still would use the text metaphor of like it's still a separate book written by Deborah Chow and Shelby Harold. But I still would think that they were very much looking at 1 through 6 a lot more than even Clone, and a little bit of Rebels because you got the Inquisitors, but I think for the most part, like they took more of the the
Yeah,
pure.
maybe that's
one.
why, because it isn't as indebted to Clone Wars. It's far more indebted to the Saga films.
Right, and I would argue something like Rogue One, even Solo,
Mhm.
all of the Disney Plus series, with the exception of maybe Kenobi, are indebted more
Yeah,
to Clone Wars.
I mean that's kind of what I'm getting at. Is
Mhm.
Kenobi is the one exception. It's the one, and so that's why maybe I'm also again willing to say kind of 3.5 here because
I
it's in
wouldn't
the,
begrudge anybody. I just you
you know
said
what I mean.
that, by the
So
way. No, I
this
don't
is
think.
all terminology and ways of short forms for interpretations and experiences. I do really like what Din was saying up here. This one here, yeah.
Oh,
I mean
yeah.
that's the emotional canon, if you will. You can talk about that. People are
Oh, yeah.
think about life and about real life, about our own
I
existence, which apparently Visions does such a great job as well. So
I'll never be like, how dare you think Kenobi is episode 3.5? I mean, it was marketed that way too.
yeah,
So I
yeah,
can't help
that's
but kind of think about that too. But I kind of like looking at it kind of like as like a kind of a cold, not I mean, kind of a brutal academic sense as well.
yeah,
I mean, but obviously, yes, I'm going to totally watch episode 4 now and like, like, oh my god, Kenobi seeing the twins and he saw little Leia when they helped out. And like now
yeah.
he sees the hope of the future.
Hmm.
Emotionally, yes. I guess it's kind of a
Hmm.
final kind of point in the epilogue. I mean, I've talked about this before, but
Yeah,
let's talk about the hopefully, writer strike. Hopefully, get some studios get them what they want.
yeah,
Hopefully, the future screen material. In terms of like where I mean, obviously, it's not going to be the saga, but sort of like I'm curious, kind of maybe talk about where do you think it might be more indebted to? Will be the Book of Clone Wars or the Book of Skywalker Saga,
hmm,
or
yeah,
kind of maybe. I mean, obviously, because the weird thing about a lot of Star Wars is maybe I mean, I guess High Republic, I guess, kind of is doing that, but I would even argue High Republic still indebted itself to Clone Wars a little bit more. Is nothing. I mean, obviously, maybe that's because it's not the original creator. There's not been another book that's kind of really like everything kind of pulls from. I mean,
hmm,
there's definitely lore things that pull from High Republic, but I don't feel
yeah.
like High Republic created a sort of a massive thematic ecosystem in the same way Clone Wars or even the
The
Saga has.
gravity well. Here's a metaphor for you. There are two
Okay.
gravity wells. It's the
Yeah.
Saga and it's Clone Wars. So
Exactly.
yeah,
I mean, don't get me wrong. I love High Republic, and I think it's
yeah.
doing a great job.
Oh,
But I think it's
it's
still,
as I said, the end of High Republic is Order 66.
yeah, but still
I will.
in
Sorry.
yeah, but still very much in Clone Wars' ecosystem. So I'm kind of curious, like when the Rey film hits,
Hmm.
when the Dawn of the Jedi movie by Mr. Mangold hits,
Hmm.
I'm very curious to see what they do. The Filoni film a little less so because that's ultimately
Yeah.
built up to what we've been seeing for the last several years, which is again all connected to Clone Wars. And obviously, Filoni himself is, I mean, the co-author of Clone Wars. I would argue. I think definitely it's still George Lucas' book, but George Lucas and Dave Filoni, kind of the co-authors,
Yeah.
and obviously other writers too. There are a bunch of them. I'm not going to discount them, but you know what I mean.
Hmm.
But because again, I kind of don't want this Jedi Order film to be episode 10, 11, 12, or but obviously I don't think they're going to because, like you
Hmm.
said last week, you put a 10, you're committing yourself to 2 more movies.
Yeah.
They don't want to do that. They want to just see how this goes, and if it's successful, then they'll make more.
Hmm.
Also, I think that kind of says this is a new thing. This is not this is a new true text. So I think that kind of from a fan perspective doesn't get people all kind of whacked
Yeah.
up about like you're messing with the text
Hmm.
already. You're making your own way, which is why things like all the other non-Saga films I think are less polarizing because it's their own thing at the end of the day, even
There's
if
less
they
at
have
stake.
less at stake, less
Yeah.
original characters. But also, I'm kind of curious if there will ever be another Gravity Well like Clone Wars or the Saga ever
Hmm.
again, or is there like everything will kind of in some way. These are the two Gravity Wells. These are kind of always going to be the two Gravity Wells.
Yeah.
Maybe something like Dawn of the Jedi, even being so far away,
Hmm.
but you can still see the Gravity Well in Clone Wars, or you can still see the Gravity Well in the Skywalker Saga.
Yeah.
And I'm
Pretty
just
good
kind of
question.
curious. I mean, that's just kind of something I think about
I
a
don't know.
lot.
I mean, we talk about High Republic, and yeah, I mean, I'll think about how it's more indebted to Clone Wars. I think of it more in terms of the prequel trilogy, but again, it's so big and so beloved, and so popular. Maybe, I mean, especially in terms of all the things they're setting up, not just for phase 3, but for the next thing moving backwards. Even the way they used phase 1 to set things up for phase 2, which is using things to set up for phase 3, the time jump. Yeah, I do wonder if that's a possibility, not going forward. Certainly for storytelling in that little pocket between High Republic and Phantom Menace. I mean, that's still kind of the Phantom Menace moving towards that, the beeline there. Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, especially the thing you talk about, the Rey film. Yeah, it's going to be saying its own thing. It's going to be doing its own thing precisely because it refers back to the sequel trilogy. It refers back. It's not doing its own thing necessarily, and that's how continuity works, of course. Yeah, I mean, well, here's another thing to say though is in 1977, George Lucas did not set out to make this gravity well. In 2008, he did not set out to make this gravity well. It just took off, and both of those were just so great stories and compelling stories, and especially A New Hope, Star Wars spread like wildfire through the culture and hit a nerve that not just Star Wars. I mean, Battlestar Galactica is directly indebted to Star Wars. I mean, even that other Star franchise, Star Trek, it's really Deep Space Nine. So, yeah, and specifically to the original trilogy. So, I'd be probably some prequels too, but the real world timeline doesn't work there. But yeah,
I mean,
it would take a lot. It would take a lot, and it would just have to happen unintentionally. You know what I mean?
Oh, I agree. I don't think we'll ever, and I'm not saying it's like a cynical thing. I think it's just the facts. George was the original creator. He's not going to come at it from a mentality of legend behind him. He's just, he made the thing. Everyone else, unless you're maybe Tony Gilroy, but even then, Tony Gilroy, the studios, not necessarily because I think the studio's like interfering. I mean, Andrew was like, I think Tony Gilroy did what he wanted, but I think even Tony Gilroy's like, I'm playing in a sandbox. I'm not making the new thing here. Even someone like James Mangold, who gets a lot of time behind him, is still probably looking like, I'm still playing in George's sandbox. I get to maybe add my own little tweaks to it, but I think, you still, nothing really can ever, there's always going to be George and then kind of everyone else in kind of like the most egalitarian sense of like, no one will ever reach that pinnacle. I think it will always be built upon, like they'll always look to George, even in small ways.
Yeah. Always. I mean, the whole existence of the thing. We do have a question for you though. See what you think about this.
Okay.
Because there was no Old Republic film, there was no Ancient Jedi film or anything. Was there? Maybe it was Tales of the Jedi or something that did serve. I mean, everything Revan's story, Bane's story. Well, no, that doesn't quite work with the real world timeline, but maybe especially something about Tales of the Jedi. Did that serve as a paper EU gravity well, a comics gravity well? I know Tales of the Jedi spans such a long period of time.
Honestly, yes. Yes. In a weird way. So, maybe not aesthetically, because they wanted to make it more like the original trilogy in later games, but from a story perspective, Tales of the Jedi, very much the foundations upon which the first Old Republic games built on, the second one, and then the third one, which tried to tie in all three. So, and even the Bang books to a smaller extent, but those Tales of Jedi, that's where Korriban comes from. That's where the Sith as a species and the homeworld come from. So, in some ways, Tales of the Jedi is kind of the Clone Wars of the Old Republic era in terms of like, here's this singular kind of comic series. Actually, didn't span just like 1,000 years, and kind of was but in another way too. But I would argue that's what the Thrawn trilogy was for the post Endor era. Thrawn trilogy very much set the foundations, like in the old EU Thrawn trilogy was the foundation for post Endor era Tales of the Jedi, with the foundation for the
Old Republic,
Old Republic era for
Yeah.
sure. And I guess maybe in some ways that's what these three, well, maybe not the Filoni film, but these two other films could do, if they can be foundation. I mean, I think in some way they want to be foundations for things moving forward with Rey and her new Jedi Order.
Yeah.
But also, Tell the Jedi is 25,000 years in the past. You don't think they want to move forward, starting 25,000 years back and moving forward? Like, that can open up all sorts of stories if done right. So, you know what? In some ways, maybe it'll never reach the true heights of Clone Wars, because even there's always going to be a little bit of that. You're always going to build off of Lucas, unintentionally or not. But I do think maybe you're right in terms of like, this is going to set up these two films could set up decades of storytelling if they are really really hard hitting, in the same way the Thrawn trilogy did set up decades of post Endor EU storytelling, and Tales of the Jedi set up the whole Revan saga, Old Republic thing. So yeah,
maybe. I mean, I will debate myself and say, especially with Thrawn trilogy, that was still looking back to the original trilogy, but
I think
but like within the paper canon, there are these little, like, I do think the Aftermath trilogy itself serves as like that a little bit
with Mandoverse for sure, in a weird way.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think you're right, because I mean, you're right about the Thrawn trilogy, but Mara J, Thrawn, Pelion ideas and concepts that kind of were started in the Thrawn trilogy.
Sure.
Yeah, aesthetically it's building up from the OT, but the Thrawn trilogy itself pushed forward.
Jorah Sabaoth, oh my goodness.
Luke starting a Jedi Academy, Jedi school, founding a new Jedi Order, which I guess we always thought was going to happen anyway. But those storylines just pushed forward and forward and forward. So it doesn't have to be just aesthetics; it can be ideas. Like, again, Clone Wars. Clone Wars set up a Mando story, and 2 decades later, look at where we are. We kind of reached a milestone in that story just a couple months ago.
Yeah.
Ahsoka's had this whole storyline that's going through 3 whole eras of Star Wars. So, those things can happen still. I think you're right. Maybe I was being a little over cynical. It's like, I think
again, it'll happen unintentionally. Without, I don't think the folks making this Old Republic film are maybe they're hoping, and Disney's probably hoping, rakes in all the dough, but maybe, especially if it's surprising and compelling the way A New Hope was, such a shock to everything, and such a shock and compelling to our entire culture. So
right. I mean, they don't want to just make one Rey movie and then, okay, Rey's over, bye-bye, Rey. No. Daisy Ridley's in the prime of her life and her career. They're going to want to show Rey maybe starting up with 4 students, and then, 3, 5, 10 films later, she got 100. It's like, now we got to fight the big battle. But, I mean, whether or not, I don't know. I think they want to do it a little more naturally. See, like, oh, this is going to work, it's going to work. And if it works, like, yay, show us more Rey building her Jedi Academy. And obviously, not just tell one story 25 years in the past and be done with it. Tell one story 25 years in the past, see how it does. Obviously, if it does great, keep telling more stories in the past. Maybe you have a character you really like who it appeared, like, keep going with them, and hopefully, it keeps those storylines keep on trucking. That's what you want. That's just good franchise. But
I just want to go back to see different things. Do we talk about this? Story vectors, one thread that occasionally moves other threads. Yeah, I mean that's what we're getting at. Like, I mean, this annoying teenager that we all, I mean, I didn't care, but people didn't like, is now the most beloved and greatest television character of all time. This was a great point, Sam. Also, everyone, every culture, every country, every culture has its own history. And so and there are world religions that different cultures come to and come into. But there's different views. I mean, when a different culture goes into and interacts with that religion, sometimes it's a violent, problematic interaction often, but also just a different perspective on it too. So,
And
Yeah.
I really like the. I actually really now like the text idea and the idea
Yeah.
of books, which obviously we're paper cans, so that's kind of what we're seeing. Even though
Yeah, there
we're
you go.
making reference to movies, although we did make reference to books like The High Republic again,
Yeah.
which I do think I take it back a little bit of High Republic. I do think High Republic will, if if it goes beyond just paper cannon, and I mean it is can get
It is
acolyte,
going.
but
It's already gone beyond, like we said. At the
yeah,
top.
yeah. I mean, I've got adventures, but like if we got like a High Republic movie set in the, I would love a High Republic movie set when the High Republic officially starts, like whenever the timeline books say High Republic starts, because I don't think
Yeah.
there's any. I don't
So
think we
like
have day one. The
yeah,
era.
from the what's it called, the Ever Any Exile,
Yeah, whenever that happens, maybe we
right
can make a
around
movie
there,
about that.
like
But
500. Yeah.
but I would love to see, like, when I think Acolyte's gonna do this, I hope Young Jedi Adventures is kind of Young Jedi Adventures in weird ways, kind of my better example of it, where it's like
Yeah.
take the High Republic, which is sort of the era, look at the books, kind of look at the aesthetic it's going for, and then to make a story. Don't worry about the Nile, don't worry about the plot
Yeah.
points. Just here's a
What are the
story set
Jedi
in
like
the
at this time?
yeah, what were the Jedi like at the time? Where were what were like the what was the vibe? What was the mood? And kind of make a story around that. Jedi Survivor kind of does that a little bit, but like it doesn't worry about. You don't have to know anything about the High Republic really to play that game or understand. Just know this is called. He's a Jedi from an era called the High Republic. You get the aesthetic. You got the gold robes. Something bad happened. We can kind of guess who was behind the badness. But and then kind of work yourself from there. And I think that's how you continue to use the High Republic as another gravity well of like storytelling, which like here's kind of the era, and then what's this, or just like here's a story, and then you can use the era to great effect if you want, if it works out. But yeah, I think that's it. I think we are good to go. That was a fun one.
Yeah, it's definitely a classic Iron Cannon deep dive into what is text and canon media technology and all that stuff. Thanks everyone for joining us in the chat. Love to see a lively chat tonight. Appreciate it. Also, the comment section isn't going anywhere. So if you're watching this after the fact, we're on Underworld Facebook, on Underworld YouTube, on Iron Cannon Twitch, Underworld Twitter, Iron Cannon Twitter. The comments aren't going anywhere. Let us know what color Dagon's lightsaber is. Let us know what you think the next gravity well is going to be. Also, you can comment, let us know, give us a follow on Twitter or Instagram at Ion Cannon Pod, on the Star Wars Underworld YouTube page or Facebook page and YouTube page. Please do give this video a like and a share, and subscribe to all those channels if you haven't done so already. Joel, where can they find you on the internet?
You can find me at JID 2021, again, JID 2021, or follow me at the Ion Cannon Pod Twitter. I haven't done any of my big threads mega threads in a while, but maybe I will if I don't know if I have much to say yet. I feel like I had a lot to say today, so I got all my say out.
I suspect you're gonna have more to say after.
Oh, I will. I'll always
knowing you well enough. You can follow me on Twitter at NEUG45, Instagram at MNEUG1138. Got some soccer photos in there. Twitter, got some more Star Wars connections there too. So give me a like and a follow, and of course also the flagship at the SWU. Lots of going on, and of course the Discord. Check that out. The link below. We're both in there having chats, playing Fortnite, playing whatever else you're playing. Yeah, it's been good. It's been fun. Coming up to a year and a half, I guess. Getting there. But yeah, next week we'll let you know what we're doing next week. We'll sort that out. But yeah, until then, great conversation, Joel. Let's pull this thing and head home.